I think that was it really. Oh, this was something I put in I did a privacy policy and I added the section on restricted processing for this particular purpose. It was a much longer list because it included the GDPR mandatory privacy impact assessments. But just to give you an idea, new business ventures, partners, processes, products, services, right? Because any of those things can do processing. Remember, you don't need a system, you don't need an IT system to do processing. When you're making decisions, purchase decisions about systems and solutions, especially cloud systems. Now, what I want to warn you about, what I want to just sort of say about this is that the regulator is not saying you're not allowed to purchase that cloud system. You're not allowed to use Salesforce because it gets hosted in the USA or whatever. No. What the regulator is saying is, have you taken ownership? Have you taken control and made checks? Have you made sure that they are going to process the data in a way that is in keeping with POPI? Okay, so what they're saying is if the jurisdiction that the data is in hasn't put privacy controls in place, you need to check that there are privacy controls in place. Okay, and that's the point of prior authorization, is the regulator being that final firewall to make sure that that has happened. Because think about it this way, the regulator is responsible to you to make sure that your personal information is protected, right? That they have a mandate to make sure that your rights are protected. So if a company is making a decision about how to manage your data, and there's something going on that looks like it's going to get out of control, the regulator has to step in and say to the company, what have you done to make sure this is okay? Okay, and that's from a regulatory point of view. So they're looking for binding corporate rules. They're looking for codes of conduct. So contractual obligation, some sort of regulation that will make that third party handle the data properly. Okay, so that's enough from me, I think. Over to Howard, if there's any more questions for me.
Any more questions for Caroline?
I put one in the chat.
Yeah, there's one. There were actually two. One said authorization must be obtained for every new processing. I think they were comfortable with that. And then Mukesh asked another one. If you're going to encrypt/mask the data, do you still need authorization?
Yes, it doesn't matter how secure the data is.
Yeah.
So if one of those four things is happening, you need prior authorization. It doesn't matter what you're doing with the data, why, where it is, how secure it is, who's doing it. It doesn't matter. If you've ticked a box on any of those criteria, you need authorization, prior authorization. Okay.
And is this for every new processing that the data will be used for?
Yes.
I mean, if they are introducing a new process with the same data, with a special data, then for that process to get implemented, they have to go for an authorization. Is how I need to understand.
Yeah, so the authorization applies to the processing. So in other words, the way I look at it is that to the system, to the way that the data is being processed. So you don't have to apply, you don't have to keep applying for the same data, for the same process. You might have different data sets, but if it's the same process that has been assessed by the regulator, the prior authorization applies. You have to reapply if the process is going to materially change. Okay, so it's not like I got the prior authorization, I'm done now, I can just run with this. It's like, no, if I've got prior authorization because I want to send health information to America, and I get authorization for that, now I change my processing, I change my provider, whatever it is, I need to relook at my prior authorization. Okay, so part of your privacy impact assessment must ask you, do we need prior authorization? Do we already have it? Has it changed? Right? Do we need to reapply? Okay. So I hope that helps. I hope that sort of lifts a bit of the mystery.
It does. Thank you. Any last questions before we go? Okay.
A sideline comment.
Yes, Graham.
I was talking to two senior business analysts of it's not a multinational car leasing company, headquarters in the Netherlands. They have, just to give you an idea of the size, they have 1.9 million vehicles that they lease out. They're rather large. And one of the funnies from GDPR that they mentioned is that you're on the vehicle, the VIN number and the registration plate is considered a unique personal identifier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're driving along and there's a camera recording you, and you go cross border. Must we take the number plate off, or do they have to hide the number plate number? You know, it's these sort of silly questions that are starting to come out, because you need to know from the policing perspective who's in said vehicle or its use and where it's traveling. But now, as the leasing company, they have an issue that, well, do we just not publish these or not let anyone know who actually has leased that car from us?
Yeah.
It's just a very strange.
Well, I think it's just
how the
GDPR
hell do you manage that?
GDPR applies. That's what I mean. They don't have to go crazy. it's not like they're not allowed to cross the border. It's just they just must know that that is personal information.
No, Graham, just to help you there's a guy by the name of Dara O'Brien. He also does ethical impact assessments. He's developing, I think he's finished, but he basically put together a system he started 2-3 years ago with AI on video that would blur those personal identifiable information. So he's working through all sorts of videos the system does and applies that sort of protection.
Yeah. Somebody like Google Earth is using it already, yeah, or
Yeah.
something similar.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, for example, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they got an app called Tawakkalna that picks up on COVID, and they are able to blur faces and stuff like that. So,
but remember, that's just a security control. That's just one of the controls. It's not a reduction. It's just a security control. It's not. It doesn't mean it's not personal information.
correct, 100%. Yeah, it's the PECs that basically how do we protect or how do we
protect it? So over to you, Howard. What have you got to say about prior authorization?
Okay, great. Twacky. Yeah. Okay. So I've actually got quite a lot of information and a lot of its definitions. So I know that you won't need it all and you will be able to go through it. But I really just wanted to take you through this. And the reason I focused on data lineage documentation was really just a sort of awakening for me after Basel III that moved to BCBS 239, and basically the Basel committee said we no longer accept PowerPoint versions of your data lineage, data flows, whatever it is, and everything had to be driven by metadata tools, data lineage tools, and things like that. So that's why we're focusing on it, and I'm going to show you all the different nuances of data lineage. If you want to stop me, if I'm going too quick, please shout. And just remember that the deck will be made available afterwards, so you can go through some of it. And let's go. Okay, so the business drivers and requirements. This is always what I like in terms of why do I need to do data lineage? Everyone's on the game. And yes, compliance is certainly there. But the other thing that it helps tremendously is on the positive side are business changes, data management initiatives like data quality and transparency and audit requirements. So please note that compliance is not the only thing. And sometimes when we all just harp on compliance, people sometimes get tired of it and say, oh, we've done papaya, we're compliant, we don't need to worry about it. But there are other benefits to implementing data lineage. And there are a few slides here from a book by Irina Steenbeck, and the book's name is Data Lineage from a Business Perspective. Here she's mapping legislative requirements. You can see B is for BCBS, G is GDPR, and then we've got appropriate data checks and controls. And she defines how to build these data lineage meta models, how to populate them, and then how to look after them. So I'll take you through quite a bit of that. And really what we're saying is we start off at a subject area from a data management point of view. Data architects do that well. Start off with almost a map of all the data at a very high level. The rule of thumb is between 12 and 20. subject areas. So it's not like you've got 100 pages of all these business concepts. These are your really high-level business concepts. But what's important is your drill down to the data attribute or data element. Okay, so it's not exactly the same as a data flow that talks about high-level data sets that are moving. It's down to the data element level. And if we think about it, that's what SPI, all the PI, all that, the different data elements that you need to be aware of and the movement of that. And notice that you'll also have metadata in data models that get involved with as well. So here are some registration, legislative issues with business processes and mapping between subject areas from the source system to the data warehouse, to the data mart, to the report. And we all know that these days, it's not just a report like a PDF or a Power BI. There can also be a data extract or a data product that is exchanged with a consumer. And there we've got to be careful as well. But we have to pay attention to all of it. Okay, so from business changes point of view, data lineage is basically you have a impact analysis, so you can see looking at the data lineage that if I change the source system, then I've got data warehouse to look after data mart and reports. If I just change reports, well, the data mart, the data warehouse, and source systems aren't impacted, so I don't need to worry about re-looking at all of these different areas. And then a root cause analysis works the other way. So if there's a problem on a report, you have to work back to where the original source system is to find the quality issue. So if there's a challenge on us in terms of that number's wrong or that attribute or element of that you're presenting is wrong and the quality is a challenge, you've got to work both ways, backwards and forwards. Now, there are so many different terms here, and I must admit I really enjoy them all, and I really enjoy understanding when to use them and why to use them. But here are some of them. What is the difference between a data flow, a data lineage, data provenance, traceability, and value chain? And certainly the DMBOK documents, from a data architecture point of view, documents the definition of a data flow. From a metadata point of view, it talks about data lineage, and lots of times people are confused as to what the differences are. A nice article written by Gareth Isaac in terms of helping this. I've added to that, and I can show you here are some of the, and I like this in terms of what is the requirement for movement. So when I build lineage, what the data is moving, what's that initial requirement for that? Now there's regulatory lineage for risk data. That's what BCBS and risk data aggregation is all about, the radar. We have data protection privacy, and certainly that's what Caroline was talking about, having all of this information ready before you take it to the regulator. So you can actually say, here is a document of all the processing and everything we're doing within this flow or within this process. I've now got all the documentation for you. And also, if they come along and challenge you in terms of oh, but you're doing something wrong, you should be able to produce this pretty quickly. Of course, otherwise you could get into they just suspend your processing. So be careful of that. Then we have data protection from a breach point of view. That's different to data privacy. We have data landscape simplification. So if I need to reduce all the movement of data, we were talking about, on Monday, we spoke about polyglot persistence, meaning all different structures, all different databases. Where is all this data? And sometimes you just get overloaded and you want to simplify. We can do it as well. Then this is an interesting one in terms of aggregation of similar elements and alignment of meaning, which I, in brackets, put semantic unification. So in the different data sets, even though the name may be the same, for example, gender, it may be at a different level of aggregation, and you need to be clear about what is that definition and making sure that you're having a common definition across your different models. Chain of custody, that relates to forensic seizure, and there's a description there, suspicious or illegal activity detection. where we've got KYC, lots of it in the banking. Lots of these examples are from banking. Sorry, that tends to be where I spend most of my time. So these are all the type of things that we are collecting information, and we need data lineage, and of course we need to be sensitive about the type of information that we're keeping. We also do it from a data trust point of view. So a really nice example is if someone says, what is this number saying on this report? And you can say to them, right, this number is saying this is the glossary, this is where it comes from, this is what was transformed, and you build trust. That's one of the fundamental benefits of data lineage, data flows. Now, I've got two extra elements here is what's called data as a service. This is more and more, this is a platform where we're collecting customer data. We also getting data from data providers, for example, weather apps or social media, and then we augment the data and say, okay, these are your preferences, these are your suggestions or recommendations, and we start augmenting that data. That's what lots of people are doing, and we have to be careful in that area as well. A data value chain, that's the sort of enhancement and enrichment of data as we progress from the beginning to where it's providing valuable information, knowledge, and wisdom. And I'll deal with that a little bit more. So just quick flow. A data flow is the flow of data. Data lineage is involving the data element. So what Carolyn was talking about here is a data flow is not going to help you because it's almost at a high level data set area, whereas the data lineage is bringing it down and it's linking to your risk appetite. Okay, so notice we've also got a process lineage. We've got data classification. That's where you define your SPI and PII. And then we have a data catalog. That is the collection of all of this that allows people to look for data. And of course, you know, if you're really dealing with sensitive data, then you've got to manage the access to that data by the appropriate people. We then have these different terms. I'm not going to go through them with you. Provenance is really just about ownership. Where is the ownership of that data, especially if it's digital? You need to be able to look after it. Traceability, track the construct to where it came about. Link analysis is when you start building relationships between data, correlations and analysis. This is called link analysis. When you're looking for links, now that's a level of enrichment as well, and you're typically using the sort of attributes of the data subject with the unique ID. So you're gonna want to have all this element together, and you need to be careful of that. Okay. Then we have data lifecycle management. Please note that's not the same as data lineage. It's not the same as these different areas. Now they can, as your data lineage is moving, of course, it can be going across different data lifecycle areas, but they're not the same. And then we've got this thing called DICWA, which is data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Remember that pyramid. But there's also this transformation of, during my lineage, I'm actually transforming from data to my data warehouse. I'm adding context to my data mart, to my insights where I'm producing knowledge. That's all the sort of challenges that you're facing. And then we have a data transformation map as well. Now, this is one of the things that everybody asks me is what's the difference between the two? And I find, for example, the DMBOK and the data dictionary says, yes, there are differences, but from now on, we're going to use them interchangeable, where data is information and information is data. And data is a fact, and there's a data points. And so there's some challenges in determining the differences between this. Now, of course, as you move from data to information, when you add context, that's when you start enriching the data. That's almost your very first step, that you start adding more information to it, and one has to be careful in that area. So from a simplistic point of view, we've got increasing our understanding and improving our correctness. Okay, that's not going to go through it all now. When we have these type of requirements, then you can use these data management artifacts to describe these requirements. Okay, so for example, and that should actually be data lineage. I made a mistake there in terms of my protection. because you need to come down to the element level. So you want to, so that's sort of data protection, data breach, data classification, data landscape simplification. You'll use a data classification and data flow. Aggregation, you have to look at the traceability in terms of how that data moved from here to here, and that's part of that is that identification and DID and re-ID. So if you want to de-identify the individual and the attributes, then is it possible to re-ID them back again? Chain of custody, we've mentioned data trust. These are the different data management artifacts that you can build to help specify and understand what the requirements are for this lineage document that you're busy preparing. Okay, so when we get to the metadata and we're trying to keep all of this stuff together, please remember that we are collecting metadata and we're having to build meta models that will house the metadata. And also please be aware of sometimes that metadata contains privacy information, so you may also need to be careful of your metadata repositories that you've got sensitive information in as well. Okay, so simply metadata describes data, but it is also data. Okay, metadata specifies the context. Then when we add the context to information, and then we have data element is a unit of data, and data signal is almost the thing that generated the data element. That could be an electrical signal, it could be a business event, there's a whole lot of different ways in which we collect data. And then data instance is a value of a data element. So for example, if I'm a gender, then it could be he, she, they, whichever one is appropriate. Okay, so that's your typical meta model. Now, just to explain simply, we have different types of meta model. We have our business meta model, which describes the data that's collected during the plan and design life cycle. Then we've got the technical metadata, which is typically when we collecting data and enhancing data. We refer to that as our sort of technical metadata. And then we have operational metadata and disposal. So those are high-level definitions that you just need to be aware of. And now when we take these data lineage and break them down, we can then sort of describe what the type of metadata is. So data lineage components. We have data lineage as the entire object, and there's business metadata there in terms of data provenance. So where was the ownership and the movement? And then we've got technical documentation. And you will have to almost go to different parties to collect this metadata. Then we have business process and business functions. We have systems and applications. There's the different elements of a data model, business rules, business transformation rules, data quality rules. Here is all the type of metadata that you're collecting. And notice all of the logs and the operational data that's building at the same time. So, for example, if you're transforming somebody's data, there may be logs of that data, and you could have sensitive information there as well. But it's helpful just to be able to demonstrate what you are doing to the regulator. I know in BCBS 239, for example, if they wanted to analyze the speed and the flow of your data transformation, they also had something called non-repudiation. So when a CFO signed the final document and the transformation mappings, they would say all of these transformations were acceptable and we understand the risk and we know how to manage them. So metadata is key to allowing and showing the people that are going to sign for this stuff to say that it's all acceptable. Okay, so just some more definitions. When you talk about a data lineage, you talk about vertical lineage, and this is from your levels of data models all the way down to your data entity, your data attribute. And then we have horizontal data lineage, and this is going from one data store to another data store by some form of data ETL or data movement. but notice you'll pick up the transformation rules. And they will explain to you, especially, for example, when you have aggregation, they will explain the dimensions on which you've aggregated, and you'll use that to describe and validate whether you can re-ID, and of course, other statistical methods as well. Okay, so these are your business processes. Notice this is where your business process is on top. These are the business subjects. These are the different data entities. What business rules do you have in place? And all of this is part of your data lineage meta model. So just wanted to show you the emphasis down to an attribute level that maps to a table, and you know exactly on which report this is found and where you can have all of these elements. So remember the business change. So if I change a report, I can go all the way back to a process or a data set, and I can understand what impact it has. Okay. All right, so this is a meta model. So if any of you are really keen to go and implement your own meta model to store this stuff, here you go. Here's some ideas, some definitions. And I really like this. One of these documents is where you have to document why do you need this data lineage. And of course, what I'm trying to suggest as well is that sometimes when you're collecting the data about the data lineage, you could be collecting personal information. And you need to be able to understand why you're doing it and what it's for. Okay, so this is just how you would scope it. This is how you would manage a scope across your entire organization. So lots of what you'll find now is you've got loads and loads of different lineages, and how you're going to deal with it, how you're going to break the program up, and how you're going to measure it, and how you're going to report progress on these different elements. Okay, so just some samples there. This was just an example that I wanted to show you in terms of moving from data to information. Here are some of the different steps, and notice all the different metadata elements that are coming along. We've got data models that are being produced. We've got architecture. We've got data quality. We've got all these different elements that play a role as part of the data lifecycle. Okay, and then there's a RACI model as well. And of course, here are some of, just to give you guys some ideas, here's some of the technologies that you can use to build these data lineage definitions. Okay, everything from Ab initio to ASG, Talent, Oracle, Mantra, all of these things, Informatica. And the nice thing about it is that this element will describe which components of a data lineage is this technology dealing with. So for example, Ab initio doesn't deal with your data models, so it's not highlighted there. And you need to be careful of that, and you need to bring all of this together. Are there any questions on data lineage before I go to data as a service?
This is Rajkumar. I put a question in the chat, but I can call that out.
Okay.
So you mentioned some personal data, the privacy data could be there in the metadata. Can you give me an example of
yes.
what
And
it could be?
It was a really nice challenge. I think Veronica had it. She may be able to share, but people asked her the question of what sort of data privacy information could I have in my metadata? So if you have transformation rules, and when you're actually logging operational data, they can record what transformation happened to that data in the journey. So what was the source, and the source was like this and the target was like that. So if you're providing any form of transformation rules, that transformation will be recorded.
But still, I mean, it could be. My thought is still the rule will be there. The transformation rule will be put in, and probably we might have some sample data there, which might not be a record as such. I mean, it could be an account number of mine, which is your name of yours, and address of Caroline could be there as a data. But
yes.
Will that be an actual record? So when I say PII, it needs to be a record per se to confirm. I mean, a combination of everything needs to be for me to be it needs to be an identifiable, correct? I mean, if I just have my name, it's just a name. I mean, what someone can infer from there. So whether really can classify as a PII is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying. What I'm trying to say, Raj, is when you define a transformation mapping, tools like Ab initio, when they move the data and they transform it, they actually record some of those transformations, the before and after. So they're keeping a record of some of that operational transformation in terms of data. And in that, you sort of leaving behind trails of data privacy.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to point out that you're correct, a name on its own, I think, is kind of accepted that it's not really a PI unless you talk about a famous person, obviously. But there are very long discussions about what constitutes personal information, and a lot of the literature now will refer to personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
So in other words, data that if it were combined with other data sets, it would be personal information.
Another
yeah, so it's very broad. I mean, like the whole thing about sort of your browser, your fingerprint from your browsers, for example. There's enough information sometimes to track you and trace you. So yeah, it's very broad. It's better to say to err on the side of caution about what is data, like personal information, or what isn't.
Raj, just my experience with master data is, for example, when you have a collision in trying to bring customer data into the system of reference. Now, then it's, oh, shucks, I don't know where to put these people. I create an Excel spreadsheet and I send it off to a business person to rectify. There's the sort of metadata that you've sort of got hanging around there that's got this sensitive data in there. That's the operational stuff we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like if you think about the FICA process, for example, like when you need to profile the person,
yeah,
just the act of escalating a credit request,
yeah,
is in itself an indicator. So it's just to be aware.
Okay, so let's just go through this pretty quickly. I know you're running out of time. So notice this is almost a platform definition of data as a service. So what this is saying is that we are getting data in from the customer. We then got other providers giving us other information that we'll use to join. For example, social media, internet of data, this is a new one, and then different providers. And we bring all of this data together, and then we allow the consumers to consume the data. And notice as we go up the product hierarchy, we can have a detailed data service that's at a granular level. One has to be really careful of that, especially when it comes to health. Then we aggregate the data. Then we can provide some level of visualization, and then we can do some insights. So this is the journey that platform provides. So just to give you an example of some of the systems, and this is what I refer to as the data value chain. Everyone's trying to get more value back to the user. So let's take a simple example, fitness tracking service. Here's my data source. It's a data life and exercise. That's what I'm picking up, say, for example, from Garmin. And I do all the transformation here to better fitness management. That's the value that I give back to my customer. Now you can see there's all sorts of challenging data, understanding health, behavioral characteristics, all sorts of issues here that could be stored and are sensitive to your data products. Okay, heart data, energy consumption is not too bad, heavy equipment, okay, and things like that. So notice this is your typical 9-factor framework from your data source to your data collecting to the data, then the type of analysis that you're doing to produce information, and then your delivery to the customer that is using that information. Okay, so that's your data value chain that you're working along. And here's a simplistic view. I, as a data service provider, and I've been talking to someone that they're thinking of doing it for ESG. So the customer could be providing me their ESG data. Then I could be using a provider that provides ESG sustainability information. I merge the two, I create data, I do an analysis, and then I produce data and I deliver value back to the customer. So we've got all sorts of people getting involved with this scenario, and we need to be careful. Okay, and so this is just the flow of how we get there. That's the process. Here's another example of insurance companies that are doing similar things, and of course there's tricky data in all of these different areas. And this is sort of what I wanted to do. There's this playbook that Infotech has produced. Interestingly enough, they haven't produced any privacy assessment, which I would think is really important. Of course, I added it here, but I do believe it's part of the data ecosystem where you're looking at the democratization of data, the broker, the marketplace, how you're going to sell data, the value chain, and the use cases. Then we go into designing of the product. So we look at the stakeholders, we set up personas, journeys, then we design our product, but you should be instituting prior authorization and a privacy impact assessment here. And then you go and set it all up and allow people to exchange. But notice you need these data exchange agreements. You need data sharing agreements. So we have to look at ways of automating our data sharing agreements. And of course, data privacy needs to be part of it. So there we can look at it. We must pay attention to our data value chain. How are we going to share the data? There's some really nice examples. We were talking about COVID earlier on, about how to get it to the right level so that we can be able to share statistics about COVID, which is important, but we've got to be careful of the underlying data. How do we translate it? Now, these are the type of things that we need to show and demonstrate that we've thought of the DID and the re-ID and everything like that. We have to demonstrate that we've done that in an appropriate way. Okay, so this was just some examples that we can use of different data brokers, a manufacturing review with foot traffic, with weather data, and then we can then distribute this recommendation to different manufacturers and stuff like that. So that's sort of, I hope everyone has now a better understanding of data as a service, the type of things you need to be really careful of, all this enrichment and interesting stuff that of course excites the business, and you just have to take care of what is it that you're presenting and what you're allowing to happen. Are there any questions, any comments?
Sure, I think that was quite a whirlwind tour. If everybody else is stunned into silence, I feel the same. I think the key for me is in between all of this. So, you know, as you're going through all of this sort of data modeling and designing data services and data lineage, you know, and understanding your metadata and is it PR, isn't it personal information? I think the simplifying factor for me always is keep the data subject in view. Like, always remember the data subject. So if you're getting very clever about what you're going to do with data sets, don't forget about what the data subject will be feeling and thinking about that.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think about Cambridge Analytica, they were just being super clever. You know, they didn't pause to ask themselves, would people who provided this information to Facebook feel weird about some dark horse in the background creating weird outcomes for their lives based on that data? So, you know, just like remember that we sometimes the impact of data management might be more than you expect, and maybe you can't predict it. But that's why I think paying attention to the penalties in the acts is super important, because that's your red buoy in the ocean that says to you, there are rocks here, there's danger here. So if, you know, prior authorization is highlighting transfer of data to certain information to other jurisdictions, it's highlighting the risks of things like, you know, handling biometric information, for example. So it's saying to you, there are rocks here. people have been hurt, people have suffered consequence, people have got upset. So just slow down and just give it boil it back to the perspective of the data subject and have a look at what your obligations are under privacy legislation.
Thank you, Caroline. Graham, anything from your side?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. No, just something going back about 300 slides. You had the various tools. You showed slides showing all the tools you'd researched as to who could cover data lineage and all the information we required. There, you almost did that one. Is there someone that does everything?
No. Interestingly enough, I didn't find anyone that put everything together. So what you'll find, Graham, is that concept of a unified meta model. So, for example, you could have a meta model for data modeling, for data processing, and then some of the other areas. And then you could create a unified one that brings these things together and build all of that information for you.
Mm.
I just found it very disheartening because I know some of those are not cheap packaged.
Yeah, what I have found is that, and it's, you know, it may be a situation where lots of the times people are focusing on the horizontal movement of data and not the vertical movement. Now, what I've started to see is when I curate data from a privacy point of view, I should be looking at what is possible to join. If I'm giving you the ability to join two data sets, all right, are you going to be able to discover something that you shouldn't? So that is only achievable at a data model level, and it's not, you can't find it as a data flow element. Until someone's doing something wrong, then you'll find it. Then you'll find that they've joined this and this, and now they've got information that they shouldn't be. So you really got to pay attention, almost at a modeling point of view, as soon as you, and self-service analytics is the one that does this all the time. They just want to allow the business people to connect different data sets and come up with different answers, which is fantastic. Which is what
the value of actually looking at your data from various perspectives and the information which has been sitting there forever. And maybe you've milked it of all the value you can, but then when you look at it with a new perspective, you get new value out of it, which is great. But this is almost going against that, or you almost have to preempt an imaginary way of looking at your existing data with a sort of privacy or security hat on. So it's kind of difficult to do because you're trying to prevent against something that you haven't imagined yet.
Well,
yeah, that's why I'm saying, like, always pull it back to the data subject. You know, there was an example of it. I can't remember which store it was, but they started being able to pick up people's cell phones. So as people walked into the store, they would pick up that the person was there, and then they could link that to the point of sale. And I think it was like a card or a loyalty program or something, whatever, and they were able to link all this information together. And one instance that happened was where, and this is the thing with the privacy legislation, it does worry about that one instance, that one person, that one individual. It's not like, you know, there are scales of impact, but it definitely talks about that one person. And there was one instance where a card was used to make purchases that were clearly in preparation for a newborn baby and they sent a congratulatory message to the cell phone of the customer on that loyalty program to say, congratulations, you know, for the arrival of a new baby. We want to let you know about these discounts, etc. Now, this is marketing getting very clever about things like location information and, you know, mapping different data sets together. Problem is that this was a 16-year-old using her father's loyalty card and hadn't told her parents yet. Now, and that was her dad's phone that got the message. So you could see how, like, no marketing person would have foreseen that, right? But if you were being sensitive to data like to privacy, you might think, well, we're dealing with health information. Let's just be cautious.
Yeah. And Graham, just to also go on with that, there's actually a good example that Dara O'Brien pointed out in the Irish area, where using a data model, all of a sudden they had relationships between different data sets, which meant that they could connect the location of the Irish voter to people. And so there was a census, and there was another area. And when they made the data join, they could determine who voted from what house and what their vote was,
Yeah.
which is highly sensitive. Now, what I think is important is that you would label with the metadata in the data model certain entities that have this sensitive information, and anyone finding a join or finding a connection to that element, that's when the bells go off, and that's when you have to start to apply the curation.
That's very funny that exactly that example that you're mentioning now is what those two senior business analysts mentioned to me. Was actually this morning, when they start to tie customer information, billing information, across to the asset information, across to the registry of vehicles.
Yeah.
Individually, yes, some have got sensitive information, but you don't see a nice picture. But when you can sort of almost wormhole or link one to the other, then you start to see a different perspective of the data.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, so my hope is that prior authorization will give you a tool that will help you to know where the priorities lie.
That's totally why it was sidetracked there.
Can I just, for some reason, I am not able to use the chat window.
Oh.
I have a love-hate relationship with Teams.
Oh, right.
Anyway, I have a link where I have more information about prior authorization that I wanted to share with everybody.
If you put it on WhatsApp, WhatsApp.
It's a bit desperate, but sure, I'll do that. Here it is, yeah. Thanks. So what I've done there is I've just given you the links to things like the guidelines and the application document and stuff. So if you want to get more information, read those. And if all else fails, open the Act, download the Act, do a search for prior authorization and read what it says, because it is actually pretty straightforward.
Okay. Got it. Okay, it's in the chat box. So anyone who wants to read up more about prior authorization, there you are. That will also be in the recording. Fantastic. Any further questions before we close? Carolyn, I'd just like to say thank you again for giving us that introduction.
Oh, very welcome. Yeah. Looking forward to teasing it into more detail into your world. We have to spend more time together.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm very happy to hang around. If anybody wants to ask me questions, or if you're a little bit worried now, or if you're feeling like, hey, but what about this and what about that? This is what we've been doing. What do you think? I'm super happy to answer or sit around and help out. It's not a problem.
Judy, I'm sure you've got some questions. I haven't spoken to you for many years, but I'm sure you've normally got questions. Judy Howard.
Hi, I spoke to you last year. It's really lovely to be back, I must say. Fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed it. But then again, your presentations are always good. So I'm hoping to join you more often this year.
Fantastic. Are you involved in data privacy? Any issues that
To a very slight degree at the moment. Yeah, I'm working with a company that are very new on this whole track.
Okay.
So what you're talking about is, yeah, pretty mature.
Excellent. Okay, we do have a deck that takes through a lot of these things, so you can see other discussions that you may be interested in, or certainly reach out to Caroline for more details on the actual data privacy, and then I can help more on the data management side on how to implement it. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Very
Bye.
enjoyable.
Hey, thanks,
Thank
Judy.
you. Thanks
So-
for the presentation.
Thanks, everybody.